Jean Bardin. Bardin had a donkey. It wasn't a real donkey. That's the nice thing about being a philosopher, is you don't actually have to have the inventory. But Bernard's donkey was an idea. It was a paradox of a donkey that was in the barn. It was a hungry donkey and it wanted something to eat. And at one end of the barn there was a nice big pile of hay, the kind of hay that any donkey would want, and he could go over there and eat of it and be filled. But the problem was, on the other side of the barn there was an equal sized bale of hay, just as good as the other, and the donkey had to choose between the two. But since the donkey's just a donkey and it's not a thinking being, it didn't know which one to choose, and so it stood there waiting until it starved to death. Boudin's donkey is an example of how indecision can cripple us. Where either way, the donkey could have fed itself, but because it could not make a choice, because it didn't know how, because it didn't go any direction, it starves to death. I know some people like that. I know some churches like that. There are times when we let indecision rule us. We're like the folks in Joel chapter 3 and verse 14, when the prophet says, multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near the valley of decision. There are lots of people sitting in that valley of decision needing to make a choice. Like the Israelites in 1 Kings chapter 18 verse 21. When the prophet Elijah had a contest with the prophets of Baal. And he told the people there, he said, how long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, follow him. How long will you waver between two opinions? How long will you hesitate? How long will you sit there in the moment of indecision? Choose a side. Pick one. If God is God, serve him. If Baal is God, serve him. But you must make a decision. It's what Joshua challenged the people in Joshua chapter 24 and verse 15. If it's disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourself today whom you will serve. Whether the gods that which were our fathers served beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in the land which you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Make a decision. Choose for yourself. If you're going to serve God, serve him. If you're not, choose someone else to serve. Serve the gods from where you came from. Serve the gods from where you're going. But in the end, make a decision. Being stuck in a decision is just indecision. And indecision is a bad place to be. But it is an especially bad place to be for people who desire to be fruitful. If we truly want to be fruitful, we have to learn to make a decision. We have to learn to not waver. We have to learn to choose. It's hard to make good decisions. You know, if you watch a college football game or professional football game, you've probably noticed that these games are taking a lot longer. And one of the reasons is because anytime the referees make a call or they're about to make a call, they stop and they go and get a huddle together, right? They all come together. I was watching the OU game this week, and that seemed like half the game was the referees coming together to make a call. And then we think everybody on the field knew what it was, right? But yet they'd come together and they'd huddle for a little bit, and then they'd come back and they'd say, well, here's our call, but it's going to go to replay. So they go to replay, and they'd come back, chance to get some more commercials in, and you'd sit there and go, come on, just make a decision. Well, you know why they do that, right? Because everybody hates when they get it wrong. We just want the referees to be right. But the truth of the matter is, you know how many times those referees are right? About 50% of the time. You know why? Because about 50% of the people in that stadium thinking no matter what the call was, it was the worst call they ever saw. And the other 50% thinks it was the best call ever until it reverses the two teams, and then everybody thinks it's the other way. A lot of indecision, a lot of waiting, a lot of second guessing. And nobody's much happier about it. What do we do about indecision? Let's consider a passage of Scripture. Would open up your Bibles to James chapter 1 and verses 6 through 8. Here in the text we read, James says, but he who asks in faith must ask without doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by winds. For that man not to expect he will receive anything from the Lord, being double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. That last line is what I want you to start your consideration in. The double-minded man. Literally, the word that's used there means two spirits. In other words, he's of two directions. There are a lot of different translations of that. There's some rather unusual ones I wanted to point out to you. The Holman Christian Standard translates that line this way: an indecisive man is unstable in all his ways. The New American Bible translates it, since he is a man of two minds, he is unstable in all his ways. As one paraphrase put it, it said, the person who doubts is thinking about two different things at the same time and can't make up his mind about anything. A double-minded man is looking at it both ways. A double-minded man can't choose, and because of that, everything he does is unstable. Everything he does falls apart. Now, in the context of this passage, where this line comes from, we need to notice that a couple of things are in place here. Number one, this is not somebody who is stuck in indecision because they don't know that they have a choice. It's not about not knowing the choice. In other words, it's I just don't know what to do. Because you go back to verse 5, in James chapter 1, verse 5, James tells us, but if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and he gives generously without reproach, and it will be given to him. Whenever you have a decision to make, you take that time to gather information, right? To weigh the pros and cons, to try to figure out what is the right course to make. But that's not really what the indecisive man he's talking about here, the man of two spirits is, because that man should know that if you need to know, you can ask of God. And so many times when it comes to our spiritual decisions, it's not the lack of knowledge that we have, because God will help us in our decisions. He will make it clear. For example, Philippians chapter 3, verse 15. For those who are mature, let us think that way, and if you think anything otherwise, God will reveal that also to you. God is not expecting us to run blindly. He is not expecting us to make choices where we have no idea. God gives us wisdom. God will give us understanding. And it's something that we should pray for. It's something that we should have so that we can make a decision. Oftentimes we veil our indecision in, I just didn't know what to do. When the truth of the matter is we knew what the choices were. We just didn't want to make them. And that's not really what the problem is. It's not about making that easy choice. Sometimes we say that, it's a hard choice. But it's not really a hard choice. We know we can do this or we can do that. The hardness of it is the consequences of it. But even go back in verses 2 through 4, and we can see James has eliminated that. Here he says, count it all my joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let that steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Notice he says, don't be surprised when you consider it joy, when you have all kinds of trials, when it's difficult. Because in those difficult situations, it teaches you patience. It teaches you steadfastness. And that steadfastness leads you to maturity, to be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Here he's telling us you're going to have to make some difficult choices, choices that have consequences, choices that might lead you to trials of various kind. You see, indecision isn't sometimes just not making a choice, but indecision is making a choice and immediately reversing course when it proves difficult, or when somebody complains about it, or somebody pushes back against the choice that you make, and we say, okay, I make it, and we go back. That's the same problem. That's the same indecision. That's the same two-spiritedness that makes us unstable in all our ways. See, indecision is the enemy of productivity. It is hard to be fruitful when we can't make a choice. It is hard to be what we're supposed to be when we waver between two decisions. When we're stuck in indecision, we don't usually end up doing anything. So how can we avoid that? Well, let's go back to our main text in James chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. Why is indecision so unproductive? Because he tells us it lacks faith. Right? Isn't that where James started off by saying he must ask in faith without doubting? What does Hebrews 11:1 tell us about faith? Now, faith is what? The substance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Faith in its essence is not what you can see, what you know for sure. It's what you hope for. And as Romans chapter 8, verse 24 tells us, for he who hopes and has been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes in what he already seen? Hope is not about the obvious. It's about trusting in something else. You know, we're never going to know everything. Sometimes we say, well, can't make a decision because I don't know enough. Well, how much is enough? We're never going to know everything. At some point, we have to trust. The Israelites had to trust that God would serve them. If they said, I'm going to serve God, they had to trust that God was going to be there, that God was going to handle things for them. They had to put their faith in Him. But indecision is a lack of trust. Maybe it's a lack of trust in God. Maybe it's a lack of trust in ourselves. But what indecision leads to is nothing. Indecision leads to no action, and faith always leads to action. Consider what it says in Hebrews 11. By faith, Abel what? Offered a better sacrifice. By faith, Noah prepared an ark. By faith, Abraham went out. By faith, they did something. They acted. But indecision doesn't do anything because it's not a faith. And without that kind of faith, we cannot be pleasing to God. Hebrews 11:6. Without faith, it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and He is a rewarder of those who seek Him. Faith is not just believing that God is, but believing it enough to act upon it, that He will reward those who seek Him. And when we are doubting, we're not really thinking that He will. I believe that He is, but my doubts tell me He won't actually reward me if I obey Him. You see, that's why indecision kills productivity, because it lacks faith. Why else is indecision so unproductive? Because it causes us to be tossed about like a wave, right? Back and forth. Ronald Reagan told the story when he was younger. He said his aunt took him to the local cobbler and she was going to make him a pair of nice dress shoes. He never had anything like that, so he was obviously excited. He went to the cobbler, he measured his feet, and he asked him when he got done, he said, do you want a rounded toe or do you want a square toe? Well, young man Ronald Reagan didn't quite know, and he wanted to go out and see what the other kids had or what was popular. So he told the cobbler, he goes, I'm not sure, let me get back to you in a day or two. Well, a day or two passes by, and he happens to see the same cobbler. He said, do you ever make up your mind about your shoes? He said, not yet, I'm still thinking. And he went and called the cobbler, came back the next day and asked him if he knew what he wanted. He still wasn't sure. Cobbler came back the next day and gave him his pair of shoes. He was shocked. He hadn't made his decision. And then he looked down at the two shoes, and the left one had a square toe. The right one had a rounded toe. Ronald Reagan said, I learned a lesson that day. If you don't make your own decisions, somebody else will make them for you. You see, indecision means we don't know, nothing happens. And because of that, we are vulnerable to every wind that comes about and against us. You can't trust a wave. Wave will have us here and there. Hesitation can cost you the game. When you hesitate, when you're indecisive, you rob yourself of the ability to take intentional action. You're pushed by every little thing, tossed here and there. Reminds me of what we read in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 14. As a result, we're no longer to be children tossed here and there by waves, carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by the craftiness and in deceitful scheming. See, people that assign themselves to indecision have other people making their decisions for them. And usually it's not the people you want making your decisions for you. It's everything that comes along, every gimmick, every bit, every false doctrine, every false idea. Because you won't decide, someone will decide for you, and the tail begins to wag the dog, and next thing you know, you're being led in the wrong direction. As Bob Turner once wrote, he said, when you can't make up your mind, usually you stay where you are, and that's usually in the middle of nowhere. When people don't know what's going on, they begin to lose trust in those that they're trying to follow. And if we're bandied about by everything because we're indecisive, we're not very trustworthy. Not to anyone around us, not to our own selves. That's why it's so unproductive to be indecisive. It causes us to be tossed about. But it also keeps us from receiving anything from the Lord. Notice what he says, that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord. The one who prays in doubt, the one who's being tossed here and there, when it comes time for God to give him what he asks, when God is supposed to bless him, when he's asked for those things, he's not going to receive them. Why? Because he's not going to do anything with them. There's a story of a man who had a friend of his come along, and he said, man, I want to show you something. I met the dumbest kid I've ever met in my entire life. He's the dumbest kid I ever saw. The guy said, well, why do you say that about him? He said, let me show you. And he came up to him, he said, pulled out his wallet, and he pulled out a $5 bill, and he put out a $1 bill, and he showed it to the two boys, and he said, now, I'll give you one of these. Which one do you want? The boy looked at it, and finally he chose the $1 bill. The man just started laughing. He said, oh, I can't believe it. Every time. He said, I've done this to this kid 10 times, and every time he chooses the $1 bill over the $5 bill. How could any kid be that dumb? And he was laughing so hard, he excused himself to go get a drink of water. And the man that was standing there, he looked over at the young boy, and he said, now, why didn't you choose the $5 bill? I know you're smarter than that. And the boy said, well, if I choose the $5 bill, he'll quit playing the game. That boy knew if he did it over and over again, he'd show everybody in the world. He only may be making $1 at a time, but he was still getting more than he would. I wonder if we're that smart. If we expect God to just keep doing something even though we don't do anything with it, if we expect God to continue to bless us, or when he gives us blessings and we don't do anything with them, should we expect God to continue to give us anything? It's like Jesus talked about in Luke chapter 19. The parable of the minas, which is similar to the parable of the talents. In there was a man who was given a sum of money. A sum of money he was expected to do something with. But what did he do? He went and hid it in the ground. He didn't do anything with it. And what does the master say to him in verse 24? Take the mina away from him and give it to the one who already has 10. But they said to him, Master, he already has 10. He said, I tell you, to everyone who has, more shall be given. But to the one who does not have, even what he does have will be taken away. Do we realize what he's saying there? He's saying that God would rather give blessings to people who already have plenty because he knows they'll do something with it, than to continue to bless people who won't do anything with it. He'll take it away. And when we don't make a choice to serve God, when we don't make a choice to follow God, when we don't choose to do something, why would we expect God to continue to bless us? Indecision leads us to some foolish thinking. I'm reminded of the cartoon parents. We're talking about their ill-behaved child, and they said, we've tried nothing, and we're all out of ideas. How do we expect anything to work if we don't do anything? How do we expect to get better if we don't try? How do we expect to be fruitful if we won't choose to act? You know who will give you all the time in the world to decide something? You know who will sit there and say, don't worry about it. Don't be rushed. I know you're busy. I know you got other things to think about. Don't worry about serving God. Don't worry about putting faith. You know who will tell you that all day long? The devil. Satan. Satan will tell you, you really don't need to do anything. You're not really sure. Maybe you should put it off. Satan will always tell you to be indecisive. Satan will always tell you now's not a good time. Satan will always tell you that, well, maybe if you did this, it could cause something bad, so it's better not to make any decision. Because he knows if he tells you that, you won't do anything. And if you don't do anything, you'll be stuck where you always were. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be stuck here when the end comes. Because this place is going to be destroyed. It's going to be burned up. I want to go somewhere better. And if I want to get there, I have to go. I have to make a choice. I have to decide. And I have to act. Because that's what faith is. It's believing, and believing enough to follow through. It's making a choice. It's not wavering between two opinions. It's not waiting to see, well, what will come out best and then deciding. No, it's choosing this day who you will serve. It is no longer wavering between two opinions. It is getting ourselves out of the valley in indecision and into the path that leads us to heaven. So what are we waiting for? 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 2, it says, "At the acceptable time I listened to you, and on the day of salvation I helped you. Behold, now is the acceptable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation." If we want to ask, we need to ask God without doubting. If we want to come, we need to do so without looking back. Satan will tell you there'll be a better time. But God tells you now is the acceptable time. Satan will tell you, don't rush to decide. But God will tell you, choose you this day who you will serve. Let's be careful that our indecision doesn't keep us from being unproductive. That our unwillingness to make a decision, our unwillingness to move forward, our unwillingness to bear the consequences of what we do keeps us from receiving the reward that God gives those who seek Him. And let's not fool ourselves into thinking that we will continue to be blessed if we seek Him only in doubt and indecision. Today, do you need to make a choice? Today, has the line been drawn in the sand? Because if you don't make the decision, someone else will make it for you. And Satan will make you the decision to take away that choice from you. So don't let your choice be taken away. Act. Believe. Choose. If you're ready to choose God today, if you're ready to put on His Son in baptism, if you're ready to follow and dedicate yourself to walk with Him more closely, we want to give you that chance to let that choice be known right now while we stand and sing.